So ni hao, everybody. Actually, this is quite an unusual presentation for me because for two things, really. One is there's almost no technology in it. And the second thing is I've not just prepared it in the lobby earlier. So these are sort of two normal things. As Derek said, it's been quite busy this year trying to sell our company to Huawei, which we've successfully done. And it's just the last few months really been trying to work with Derek to try and figure out how do we sort of move the NMI forward and how can we be a better organisation to represent all our industries together. I'm just going to do a couple of slides, just talk about the kind of background and then going to talk about how NMI fits in. So firstly, why win technology? Because A, it's fun, but secondly, it does change lives actually. It's not, we don't work in the city, we're not parasitic, living off somebody else's money. We're actually creating real things that change people's lives here. So that's why we do it, I think. It also generates wealth. So the other reason we do it is we do it to make money. Actually, it generates a lot of wealth. I looked at the top 20 technology companies globally to just try and get a sense of just how much wealth has been created in technology. So I thought that maybe the easiest way is I'll look at the market cap of the top 20 companies. It's kind of a pretty good indicator of what value they've created. And actually, that's a big number. It turns out it's $3 trillion is the market cap of the top 20 global companies. Apple alone is $673 billion. So $3 trillion is a lot of money actually, and that's the kind of the top 20 companies. I've just added up the market cap, $3 trillion. The thing that's interesting about that though is that actually 92% of that $3 trillion are American companies, and about 3% are EU companies. In fact, on that list, there's only one European company, which is SAP, and everybody else is American or Asian, mostly American actually. So it's a bit pathetic, really, as a region, and I was trying to figure out why that is the case, really. What makes us so pathetic at building sort of big technology companies here? It must be that we just have less technologists. We just must have fewer of them. So I looked at how many sort of science, technology, engineering, maths graduates there are in the US and in Europe. Actually, in the US, there's actually 3.4 million in their 20s who've done what are called STEM degrees. So that's a lot, actually. So you kind of expect, well, that must be the reason why America's done so well. It's got a lot more STEM graduates than we possibly got here in Europe. Oh, hang on. Actually, no. We got roughly twice as many in the EU. So we're not as uneducated or as thick that we can't actually build these companies. We're not actually organising ourselves to build these companies properly. Okay, so there's more venture capital in the US. Well, I mean, that's certainly true, actually. But honestly, I think capital follows returns, really. There's plenty of capital in Europe. The fact it's not being put into venture is nothing to do with the fact that these guys are missing some fantastic opportunity. We're not presenting them with good opportunities. So capital follows opportunity, and there's no question in my mind if we built really successful startup companies that generated return for investors, we see a lot more venture capital here in Europe. There's probably more clustering in the US. So if you're a chip engineer, I mean, you probably will go to the Bay Area or go to Austin, and you'll be hired by one of the sort of companies in Santa Clara, and they can pick the best people and everything. So you do get this kind of clustering effect. We're a bit more spread out in Europe, it's certainly one reason why we definitely need to stick together as a region. And the policies of preventing people moving from country to country make absolutely no sense whatsoever. But we're actually developing some good clusters in Europe. So actually London's pretty good, Cambridge is pretty good, Berlin's pretty good, Stockholm's pretty good. So there are some clusters actually developing here in Europe as well. And let's face it, really, it is actually really just down to us, actually. There's no substitute for ingenuity, creativity, and hard work. That is what's actually going to build some companies here. And there are no sort of fundamentals here that are causing Europe to be so bad and causing America to be so good. We just have to kind of get our minds around it and decide between us that we're actually going to go and do this and build some big companies. And so, with that in mind, with the raw ingredients that we have here, what kind of role does a body like NMI have to kind of help us be more successful? So we've then been turning our attention to, okay, so what is NMI for really? And let's try and decide what's happening. But let's actually start then looking at NMI, and maybe what we need to identify is some new mission initiatives for what it is we're going to do here in the UK with the organisation that we're all members of, and how can we use it to help us build successful big technology companies in the future. So let me start, and this is a trickle from a guy I worked with at ICERA, who Pete Hughes will know, called Pete Cumming, who always, in defining any kind of project, would firstly write down what it's not. Okay, so what it's not is, we're not a global organisation for any horizontal. We're not trying to do what GSA does or SEMI. We're not a global organisation for any vertical. We're not doing small cell forum initiatives or whatever. We're not a standards body, so we're not developing any technology standard as such. We're not actually a professional body like IEEE or in the UK IET. We're not a regulatory body like CEPT for telecoms regulation across Europe. In fact, our members are probably going to be members of those organisations anyway because of kind of what they do. So we're not doing any of those things actually. But we are here to bring people together in a national forum. And why does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because actually we have the ability to share know-how and to share experience between market verticals. So what you may have learned in healthcare, we might be able to apply in fintech, or what you've learned in Internet of Things, we might be able to apply in automotive. So we're also here to identify verticals where there's enough clustering that it's nationally significant, and we can actually put some oomph behind that and actually sort of pull people together and actually do more than we could do individually. And of course, we share some national resource. We've got a pretty strong venture community. I mean, literally, a few miles down the road, we've got the biggest venture capital base in Europe. We also share the same angel investor clusters. We have a sort of school curriculum and university curriculum that a lot of our kids go to. We share, roughly, just about share a common government. Not quite, obviously. But there's sort of government programs, TSB, for example, being, what's it, Innovate UK now. And they've got some spending power. We talked about the NHS earlier. And then, of course, the governments can set tax policies, which can be quite helpful, and regional development policies and so on. So there's some reasons why it kind of makes sense for us to get together as a nation and try and figure out how we can be better at this stuff. We obviously share a common language, and we can promote our industries and we can celebrate our successes. And so those are things that, as a national body, we can really make a big difference in. So if you take the UK, then actually 26% of the European venture capital investment is actually invested in UK companies. So over a quarter of all the venture capital goes into startups here in the UK. So that's a fantastic starting point. Actually, in the past it was a bit higher than that, but it's certainly a great asset we can leverage. And we're not sure exactly about the provenance of this number, so bear with me on it, but something like 40% of the non-IDM, and I suspect we're counting NXP as an IDM here, by the way, of the non-IDM electronic system design activity is actually based here in the UK. So the UK has actually got a lot going for it. So you might say, why aren't we doing this on a European scale? Well, actually, the UK has probably got critical mass of venture capital and critical mass of people doing similar sort of things, that it does actually make sense to do this at a national level. So I think we have a big opportunity to kind of propagate learning between companies to improve our national performance. And that is kind of why NMI exists. It's why it's worth us all being a member of it, and it's worthwhile us all contributing to help make that much more successful. But first, let's sort of dive in and look at what's actually happening in our industries to see, well, practically, what does that mean? So I think actually Europe is not doing too badly in tech. I complained about the fact we haven't got any of the top 20 companies, but we've actually got a lot of success in what I'd call light tech companies. So yeah, here's a bunch of companies that have been sort of successful. I mean, typically in the hundreds of millions or the 1 or 2 billion level that have been invested in venture. Actually, quite a lot of them are in the UK. So actually, we've been all right at this, and it's actually getting better. And the clustering that's happening around Old Street and in Cambridge and so on is actually improving. So in light tech, it seems to be sort of feasible to sort of build companies and do it relatively quickly and build big companies. In the US, they can do it bigger. They're just a bit more experienced in putting a lot of capital behind stuff. So Uber's a sort of classic example. So Uber, founded in 2009. So I'm sure many of you got an Uber app on your phone and you use it for taxi, replacing the London taxi service, unfortunately. It's just raised some money off a $13 billion market cap. It's founded in 2009, this company. So I mean, it's going to go public at some sort of enormous valuation. So yeah, it is possible to start companies and make them quite big, and we've got some successes. DeepMind is an interesting company. Obviously, sort of artificial intelligence, deep analytical learning algorithms in the cloud, bought by Google for $400 million at the beginning of this year. We have no idea what it's got in there. It looks interesting. It looks quite complicated and technical. But there's a bunch of successes here. The next phase, I think, we need to try and engineer is how to turn that emerging capability of creating successful light tech companies into creating more deep tech companies. So deep tech is really a business founded on technological innovation or scientific discovery, which a lot of the light tech companies are not. Actually, the EU is pretty good at deep tech. We have a lot of fundamental engineering capability. Actually, the UK is really a true innovator within the EU. At all sorts of levels. So actually, we're in a pretty good position to do this if we can figure out what it is we mean and how to bolt deep tech capability onto a whole stack that allows us to create these companies. And as many people have been saying, in order to do that, we've really got to partner actually quite heavily to kind of allay the deep tech costs. So we're not really talking about building fabs as such here. Well, we might want to do that, but it may not be necessary to do that. But also we can't stay in the deep tech layers. If we stay in the deep tech layers, we're dead. We have to start verticalizing into specific market verticals, and that means we've got to come out of our comfort zone, and we've got to learn about some of the other skills that we need in order to sort of turn this deep tech innovation into a successful company, and in order to create this kind of whole product that we need. So maybe some of the critical deep tech success factors are, firstly, we've got to be expert in the layers above the deep tech innovation to address vertical market needs. And secondly, we've got to learn quickly from other market verticals and be amongst the first to pioneer in our particular space. And so if you look at where our industry, I mean, most of us have been in the semiconductor industry or the supply industry to the semiconductor space. So that's kind of where our industry really began. It really began in creating sort of generic technologies like memory chips or power management chips or FPGAs or so on, semiconductor companies. And then more recently, the fabless model took over, where we ended up with sort of market verticalized companies doing automotive chips or communication chips or multimedia chips or wireless communication chips and so on. Those are typically fabless companies where instead of doing the semiconductor manufacture, we actually were managing a relationship with a foundry. And both those two types of companies did chip design and verification as the kind of next layer up in the value chain, if you like. And then the next layer up above that was we had to sort of develop some hardware systems in which those chips went into. So yeah, typically a reference design, but sometimes it's a complete system we're designing. And yeah, typically the fabless companies did more of that than the IDMs. And then, of course, we had to write a load of embedded software, so RTOS drivers and tools to debug our systems and so on. And again, typically the fabless companies did more of that than the IDMs. And then we had to solve a lot of security problems. We had to make sure devices could be properly mutually authenticated against some kind of counterparty. And then we had to put correct levels of encryption in place that allowed traffic to be fully secured. And then we had to write a load of application software on top. The startup company that I did before with Pete Hughes is here, we wrote about 1 million lines of code that run on top of our chips. And we actually ended up with roughly 200 engineers writing this protocol stack and about 25 engineers design the chip. I mean, it's a massive ratio of application software to chip design. And of course, we had to, increasingly now, what we've got to do is connect this stuff into cloud software, completely different world. I mean, really utterly different. Distributed computing systems, you were talking about high availability clustering, we're talking about NoSQL databases, and we're talking about scalability, big data analytics, and so on, completely different environment. And of course, we've got to then put products into manufacturing, and we've got to make sure they're testable and so on. So the direction of travel of our industry is really from semiconductor foundry, manufacture, and supply to that industry. And it's now really about vertical stacks of value, including actually a lot of software. And in fact, probably now 20% of the effort in building a company is in the semiconductor design and verification layers, and roughly 80% is in everything else, really. And that's probably the pattern for pretty much everybody in the room, actually, is that they're in the middle of that, or they're through that transition, really. So in terms of NMI then, what do we want to do? Well, we certainly want to make sure we can continue to support and prosper everybody who's in the semiconductor manufacture layers and design layers. So we want to continue and to grow our capability for that. So no question about that. That is a core part of what we do. The thing that distinguishes NMI from other organizations like Tech UK is that our members do real stuff. We actually design stuff here. We know and we can share that information with our colleagues. So we definitely want to continue to do that. But we've also found that we can create some vertical slices from top to bottom. One of which is in the automotive space. So the innovation network around automotive electronic systems, ASIN, has shown that we can actually cluster people from top to bottom in a particular market vertical, and we can actually solve some problems by doing that they couldn't solve individually. So I think step number 2 is let's replicate that model in some additional verticals. So let's pick some verticals where there's sufficient clustering in the UK. So it could be healthcare, it could be Internet of Things, or it could be wireline communications or whatever. And we're going to basically create some vertical clusters in that space. Third thing I think we can do is we can then create some events. It could be workshops, or it could be conferences, or could just be websites or work groups and so on, where we share information about a particular subject, probably a subject that we're not necessarily experts in, but we need to know about in order to build these companies. So cloud computing is one I find particularly interesting. I happen to bumped into a company in Southampton. I've told Derek about a few times, where this guy just happened to love talking about the different choices of open source software packages to put together for cloud computing. And it actually organized events for all the local companies to come and learn from what he'd learned about these different packages and so on. And he created a little cluster of companies that were sharing information about all these open source bits of code, actually. So yeah, there's no reason why we can't do that at a national level and actually add a lot of value, because we're all going to need to know about this stuff if we're going to build these successful companies. And it could also be security. Actually, UK is pretty good at security. So we've got GCHQ down the road, and yeah, the guys who own Neul now, Huawei, actually collaborating with GCHQ and how to prevent access to information. And so we can basically provide more value to our members by doing that. So some of the practical solutions that I think you'll start seeing Derek will talk about some more is, firstly, we're going to establish some new innovation networks in specific verticals to replicate the ASIN model into some spaces that we all think are quite interesting. So yeah, definitely encourage you to join those groups and participate, because they are going to be really helpful, I think, to sort of create a real focus in our country on these things. The second is, we're going to organize some well-researched NMI events on some specific horizontals that may be outside your comfort zone, but you really, really need to know about this stuff. So come along, learn about one of these verticals that you're going to figure out at some point how to integrate that into the products that you're thinking about and you're designing. And then thirdly, you're going to see a lot more communication via social media about what NMI is doing. So you see a lot more to and fro of data. So those are three things I think you'll be seeing in the very near future from NMI. So we're working really now on how to best organize NMI to do that, how to fund it, and how you're going to be able to see some fast progress. We've got some crazy ideas on funding that you might have a chance to participate in our EIS schemes that we're going to be setting up. In which case you'll make money as well as help NMI, so that should be good. And so let's make NMI the key really to building successful deep tech companies in the UK. So that is, if you like, our kind of call to arms and the rallying call for why you need to be part of this organization, why you need to participate in it, and how we're going to create the environment in which you can do that. So thank you very much.